from Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Sarah Lancaster discussing options for controlling kochia in actively growing wheat fields, as well as in wheat stubble following harvest as a long-range control approach. She'll harp upon being selective in choosing herbicide for either of those treatments, as kochia has proven resistant to various herbicide types. Then the president of the Kansas Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program, Jill Zimmerman, will recap the leadership development experiences of KARL Class XV, which will be graduating soon, including a just-concluded international trip to Dubai. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Matthew McKernan on ornamental flower selection. That's the topic of next week's K-State Garden Hour webinar. All that here on Agriculture Today. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Glad to have you along on this Thursday. Into crop weed control now. This is for you winter wheat producers with a crop hopefully coming along despite the adverse weather conditions in so many quarters of Kansas. What you might be contending with now and in the future in the way of kochia. Very prominent in Kansas, as you well know. Sarah Lancaster is a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. She's alongside once again. Kochia, we've talked about it extensively. And Sarah, give us an idea of where that problem stands here as we visit in the latter part of April.
Yeah, Eric, kochia is perennially one of our troublesome weeds. It produces a lot of seeds and it blows around. You mentioned, Eric, the problem with some of the wheat stands given the environmental conditions. And I would suggest to you that those thin stands could potentially provide an opportunity for kochia to become more easily established maybe than a year that's ideal for wheat production. So even though we don't have much of a wheat crop out there, keeping an eye on that kochia and making a plan for how we're going to take care of it so it's not a problem next growing cycle is an important thing to keep in mind. And
that brings up the first point. Is there anything that can be done about its growth right now, as far along as we are in wheat production, as labels would depict?
Yeah, Eric, there are some options. A lot of times in wheat, we kind of start thinking about those ALS inhibiting or those group 2 types of herbicides. Those were the standbys in wheat for a long time. But I made reference earlier that kochia is super adaptable, and one of the ways that it adapts is through developing herbicide resistance. And so most of those group 2 herbicides, things like Harmony, are not going to give us very good control of kochia in all likelihood, given the widespread ALS resistance in our kochia populations.
But are there other alternatives that might help out if one has not treated to date anyway?
Well, so when a product has a name like Kochiavore, which is, products that contain fluroxapyr. So those group 4 herbicides, specifically fluroxapyr or starine, would be the single active ingredient there that most folks are probably familiar with. Fluroxapyr and dicamba. Those have, again, historically been some of our go-tos for kochia control. However, we are starting to see more and more cases of resistance to those particular herbicides as well. So being familiar with the resistance profile of the weeds in your field is always important, but especially when we're dealing with kochia and thinking about the options that we have for in-crop use. One group 4 herbicide that we have not confirmed resistance to in Kansas kochia populations is a new product. The active ingredient is haloxifin. The trade name is Elevore. It's not as good on kochia to begin with, so probably not going to be a go-to, top shelf type of recommendation there, but it could potentially be an option for folks that they might want to look at.
If one opts for a group 4, though, it needs to be on before the flag leaf stage?
Yeah, generally speaking, we're looking at through flag leaf or up to flag leaf. So, they do have a little bit of time.
Any other alternatives for kochia control in standing wheat now? Yeah,
so the next kind of group of herbicides that we can look at there are the group 27 herbicides. So the bleachers might be a name that we used to talk about. Those are HPPD inhibiting herbicides. So Husky is the one that folks are probably the most familiar with there. That's a group 27 plus bromoxynil. So we know that there's that synergy there between those group 27 herbicides and the photosystem inhibiting herbicides like bromoxynil. So that's part of why that combination is there. That one can also be applied through flag leaf emergence. The second choice with the similar chemistry there would be a product called Talinor. It's a similar product as well.
You do suggest in the article on this topic, by the way, that those last two be applied with an adjuvant?
Yeah, paying attention to adjuvant selection for those two products, Husky and Talinor, is important. If folks look at the label, they'll see that there are some different scenarios that are described in their combinations with things like UAN and NIS and COC as options as well. So make sure you get the right combination there for your situation.
Well, we're talking about the current crop, but you want producers, moreover, Sarah, to think long-range kochia management here, and that would be taking it through harvest into post-harvest.
That's right, Eric. And, one thing to think about as we think about our whole system approach here is that folks may actually have more options and more effective options for kochia control during that fallow period. Just thinking about how are you best going to get control of this to prevent seed production for the long term. So absolutely, I'm thinking about control and stubble is super important.
And particularly when one thinks about harvesting, when kochia gets scattered around even more at times through the process.
That's right. Combines can be great weed seed distribution tools there if we're not careful. And what happens is that kochia, you'll go through and you'll cut it off, right? And so then you have a stub. Actually, when you think one of the principles of controlling weeds after harvest, as folks are probably familiar with, is just needing to make sure you have plenty of leaf tissue there that is regrown to take in the herbicides that we want to apply.
As far as herbicide options then, post-harvest in stubble, what rises to the top there, Sarah?
Well, so we've already talked a little bit about dicamba and fluroxapyr. Those can be used in stubble as well. 2,4-D can be added in that situation too. But again, we've had some resistance hits with 2,4-D. Another product that's a little bit different to think about might be Sharpen. So a couple ounces of Sharpen can help there with some burn down activity. And also, as we think about looking at long-term activity, adding some atrazine. But again, resistance concerns there as well. So, one of the sort of standard products we think about in wheat stubble control is paraquat. So paraquat can be an option. Folks need to remember all of the considerations that come with paraquat, starting with the safety considerations and the legal considerations for that extra training that folks have now, all the way through recognizing the synergy that occurs with group 5 herbicides like atrazine or metribuzin, depending on what the next crop in the rotation is going to be. So atrazine if you're going corn or sorghum, metribuzin if you happen to be somebody going to soybeans in that wheat phase of the rotation. Other things to think about there with paraquat then would be the importance for coverage. So medium to coarse droplets, and then minimum of 15, preferably 20 gallons per acre of spray volume there.
Again, you can consult the Chemical Weed Control Guide from K-State for specifics on all of those. And we're thinking a little further ahead here, but it even matters what time of day one puts down their post-harvest kochia control in stubble, Sarah?
When we're talking about folks trying to cover large acres and just get the job done, we often can't be picky. But it's known, and it's throughout the literature with various herbicides and weed combinations, Eric, that thinking about the time of day of application can be super important. Anything we can do to be applying herbicides when those plants are less stressed, so earlier in the day, generally speaking, is going to result in better control.
Something to keep in pocket as we approach that time. And some moisture around will help with efficacy.
Absolutely, Eric. Again, one of those good just principles of weed control, right? We're trying to apply herbicides to weeds that are actively growing. So, if you've got a weed that's drought stressed and all hardened off, it's not going to take in much herbicide, and it's not going to move much herbicide to the target sites for the herbicide. So, yeah, actively growing weeds. So if you can hold off until after we get a rain, you'll be happier with the results.
And happier for other reasons, too.
And happier for a lot of other reasons.
Well, again, there's information in the Chemical Weed Control Guide. There's also an article in a recent Agronomy e-Update newsletter that you can read up on all those alternatives for Kochia Control in wheat or wheat stubble. But are we making headway in this everlasting battle against this weed, Sarah?
You know, Eric, being a weed scientist, I have lots of job security, right? So, we have options, though. And I think one thing that I would encourage folks to keep in mind is that herbicides are always going to have a place, but we've got to start paying good attention to the non-chemical things that we can do. Finding the weak spot for those weeds, finding the best time in the rotation to control, and then start to at least mentally be open to some of the non-chemical methods that some of the university folks are starting to look at. We're not ready to apply them yet on a large acre, but just be open to thinking about some of those ideas.
For the here and now, what you shared today is the next salvo against kochia and the various problems this weed presents in our cropping systems, including wheat. And Sarah, thank you for coming over.
My pleasure, Eric.
Sarah Lancaster, Weed Management Specialist with K-State Research and Extension. You can find that article in the e-Update series. Go to eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. That's a direct link. Again, eupdate.agronomy.ksu.edu. You can also find the 2022 Chemical Weed Control Guide in its entirety at the website agronomy.ksu.edu. Now this break, and when we return, that update on the Kansas Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and it's a good time to get caught up on what's happening with the Kansas Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program, which is based here at Kansas State University for over 30 years now. This program has provided valuable leadership development experiences for hundreds of graduates, and skills that those folks have taken back with them to their local communities and beyond. The president of the KARL Program is with us now. Once more, Jill Zimmerman, Mike's side. On a couple of things here, Jill, we're going to reflect back on the achievements and the activities of the current class, Class 15 for KARL, and then look ahead to a special event introducing Class 16 early in June. But it's been what kind of experience for that class as they've gone through the 2-year curriculum?
Well, Class 15's had a unique experience, Eric, because they experienced COVID, right? And so this class was introduced to Kansas in 2019, and they completed an absolutely phenomenal year one. And then they returned home from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, just right before COVID happened. And so then COVID happened, and so kind of as we figured out what that was going to look like for the program. And so, but we've added some new seminars, added some new curriculum, and that it's really, we've added some things that have made us better as a program, I think. And so they just got home from their international travels, and so we'll be wrapping that experience up.
Yeah, and we do want to focus on that international experience in just a second here. You mentioned new things added to the curriculum, which has been impressive over the many years that KARL's been in place. What are some examples there, Jill?
So one new thing, we added a new seminar, and really it was coming out of COVID because they hadn't seen each other or been around each other, and it's just like reintroduction, kind of you need some time to rebuild that network and reconnect with people and where they are in the world. And so we built a Genesis 2.0, and we did that in Council Grove, and that will happen, I think, from this point moving forward. And we really found some neat and unique things that we were able to do in Council Grove with that new seminar. And so we're super excited about that.
Mm-hmm. You'll be continuing that then.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we've added other things, some strengths-based, more leadership initiatives that maybe when you and I were in the program, we didn't have as many leadership-specific experiences where we had Dale Carnegie Strengths Finders, Dauntless Leadership, the Gettysburg Leadership Program. So we've tried to sprinkle in those throughout the curriculum as well, just to strengthen not only what we see and learn throughout the state, but to also make better versions of ourselves.
Yeah. And the exposure to Kansas agriculture is still part and parcel of the program. Obviously.
Oh, it's the backbone. If you would have heard Dr. Barry Flinchball talk about that, I mean, just gaining an exposure of what's happening around our state is critical. And with as quickly the pace of changes today, it's probably more important. You know, think about when you and I went to Garden City back when we were in the program to where if you go to Garden City now, how different that looks.
Without a doubt, right. One keynote, of course, is the international trip. It's a learning experience, of course. The destination this time around was unique, Jill. It was to the United Arab Emirates and the community of Dubai. Community's a tongue-in-cheek there because it's an enormous city on the rise and on the growth scale. Talk about that destination and what you were hoping to accomplish at it with the class.
So, great question, Eric. And the international tour is the capstone event for the KARL program, and it really brings together that whole 2-year experience that you've talked about. And, you know, folks have asked us, why United Arab Emirates? KARL's never been to the Middle East, right? That's the fastest growing region in the world. Population-wise. And they import 80% of their food, right? So fastest growing region in the world that imports 80% of their food dramatically impacts how we think and how we approach the food that we grow and the people that we grow it for. And then they also had a camel dairy, right, which is super interesting. They milked 10,000 camels, and they promoted that camel milk. Yeah, I know. They promoted that camel milk as the next best thing to almond milk and coconut water. And you could do a search for it. It's called Camelicious, and you can do a search for it on Amazon. But that milk, so all of the feed for the camels is also imported, right? So they are trying to be more sustainable as a country, but they have a lot to learn, and I think there's a lot of resources that we can provide. And I think also from a cultural perspective, Eric, it's neat. I think we have some misconceptions in the West about what we think the Middle East is like from a cultural perspective and just different philosophies of diversity and how they approach and have conversations about religion, gender, and things like that. And they're totally embracing technology. We visited the Museum of the Future, which was super interesting. And so there's just a lot of cultural differences that I think it's important for, you know, we live in Kansas, which as we think about, we like to talk about local, right? Both global and local. But if you're really going to embrace understanding a global world and the food that we produce for the global world, you have to understand what's going on in the Middle East.
As you canvassed the class after the trip, did you get a sense of what they really took away in as far as consumption of food and fiber in UAE, in Dubai, and how we might do things differently here to respond to that kind of overseas customer?
Oh, absolutely, Eric. I think the class, there was a ton of social media traffic that happened from different folks, participants in the class. And we now call them associates. So different associates would kind of blog, if you will, along their journey. And it was really interesting to see their outtakes and their thoughts and impressions and how what we do here in the States can be helpful. We visited, it's basically a vegetable production farm, and it's in the middle of a desert, right? But to be able to see the practices that they're adopting, it was very modern. And so I think there's a ton of opportunity for us, both from an educational, but also to understand how we fit in this puzzle of the world that we live in, and which is never more important today than ever.
Pretty valuable experience. Again, the KARL class having gone to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates for its international tour. The next thing on the agenda, Jill, comes up June the 4th, early in the summer. This current Class 15 will graduate from the KARL program. Simultaneously, same event, you'll be ushering in the next class. Is that right?
Yeah. So, Eric, this is the first time that we've done this format. So always before, we've graduated one class at one time, and then a separate event, probably 6 weeks later, we would announce the next class. But one of the strongest things that we hear from alumni is the value of the network. And so bringing both of those events together in one capstone event is really what we're really focused on. We have a great set of speakers lined up for both at the luncheon that we'll have that day at the Alumni Center, and then also that evening at the Alumni Center. So Andrew McRae is from Missouri. He will be the noon luncheon speaker. Just a great message. And then Senator Moran will bring the capstone featured speaker that evening. So super excited about that. And it is the first time that we've done that event, but it is about celebrating Kansas ag, rural communities. It's about celebrating the network and the people and how best to celebrate the accomplishments of Class 15 while welcoming the Class 16 and let them see the power of that network that they have the benefit of being a part of.
Obviously, that's open to incoming members as well as the graduating class and their families and friends. Is it open to anybody who'd like to attend, though, Jill?
Absolutely. It's you can find more information at KARLProgram.com under the events tab, and it's certainly any folks that would like to register and purchase a ticket online are as welcome to join us.
Go to the KARL Program website. It's as easy as that. And you're embarking on a new class. What ambitions do you have for the next 2-year go-round?
Well, that's a great question, Eric. And so there's a lot. Advancing our curriculum is always important. And, there were things that worked super well with Class 15, but then there's also some, all their locations throughout the state that make sense. What additional things do we need to have conversations about as the places that we call home are forever changing? Mm-hmm. And so as a program, we need to make sure that we're responsive to those. And so we've got some things that we're working on in terms of change, maybe different locations for this current class from what Class 15 had experienced. And so lots of things are changing. And one thing is we'll probably add a day and a half in Kansas City. And the KARL program's really never spent a lot of time in Kansas City, which if you kind of think about that, that's odd because Kansas City from a agricultural perspective throughout the Midwest has a ton of history. And then a lot of current things happen today in that Kansas City area. Yeah. So that'll be new. Always
evolving, the KARL program. And just finishing with this reminder, the KARL experience and program is a nonprofit entity, so always looking for support as well.
Right. We're a nonprofit trying to help grow and make better Kansans. And so we welcome support for graduation. If there are folks that would like to help support the big event, they're always welcome to do so.
Or the curriculum proper through contributions. You can check into all of that at KARLProgram.com. Very easy to find. And Jill, again, congratulations for organizing and orchestrating the current class, now graduating soon, as well as introducing those new members very soon as well. Thank you for your time.
And thank you, Eric, for being a great alum of the program and for your support for KARL. And congratulations on a career well done.
Oh, thank you very much. Kind of you to say. That's Jill Zimmerman. She's the president of the Kansas Agriculture and Rural Leadership Program with the latest update on KARL here on Agriculture Today. We are back now on Agriculture Today and around to time for another K-State Horticulture segment. And we look ahead to another of those K-State Garden Hour sessions, which will take place this coming Wednesday, May the 4th. These have been exceptionally popular with growers and anybody else who might be considered a gardening enthusiast. And the topic for this next session, new and improved annual flower varieties. It'll be presented by our guest. He's Matthew McKernan, Sedgwick County Extension horticulture agent. Matthew, you say that there's quite a bit new in the way of annual flower material out there.
Yes, each year plant breeders from around the world introduce new varieties of annual flowers. There's new colors, new shapes, new sizes, disease tolerance. And so when you go out to the garden center each year, there's so many more options than there were the year before. And so one of the things that we really like to look at our local Sedgwick County office is how do those varieties perform here in Kansas? Because they look great on the pictures online and on the websites and in the gardening magazines. But how do they really grow when it comes to the heats, the droughts, the winds, the insects, everything Kansas has to throw at them? And so this presentation is really going to focus on some of the work we do here in Sedgwick County, where we're actually testing new variety of annuals each year before they're available at garden centers and nurseries. So some of the new plants that are available for the first time this spring, we actually were able to test last year in our demonstration garden to see how they performed and whether or not they grew well. And so we're really going to highlight some of those success stories from last year. And also probably show you a few of the dead plants that we killed, because it's great to know that just because a plant dies, it's not your fault. It could be just not well suited for our Kansas environment.
What caught your attention as far as some of the promising new entries that homeowners and gardeners might be attracted to?
Yeah, one of my favorite annuals is always lantana. It's super heat tolerant, super drought tolerant, and we were able to try some new varieties and new colors of lantana that were new and exciting this year that I'll be able to share about. But one of the new plants that I have grown for the first time this past summer is called Callilophus. It's a variety of Texas primrose, and there was a variety called Ladybird Sunrise, or Sunglow, excuse me. And this plant is so cool because it has bright yellow flowers about 2 inches in diameter and really narrow, thin leaves. So it has nice texture when it's not blooming and bright petunia-like flowers when it is blooming, and was very drought tolerant, very heat tolerant, and kind of just like a carpet of yellow flowers as we grew it all summer long.
And there are countless other possibilities, of course, and folks can pour through the resources from K-State and elsewhere to learn about those new varieties as well as the tried and true varieties that have succeeded here in Kansas. During the webinar, you'll address maintenance tips for annual flowers. And, of course, these are grown in all kinds of media. Beyond watering, which we all should understand, what more need to be considered here?
Yeah, so to really be successful with annual flowers, you have to, one, start with the right annual plant that's going to do well right off the bat. And then we want to make sure that we have the right soil conditions and the right fertilization. Typically, most of our annual flowers bloom on new growth, so the more we fertilize them to a point, the more new growth they're going to put on and the more flowers they're going to produce. So we'll really spend some time talking about correct fertilization practices and how to really get your annual flowers that you plant to produce the most flowers throughout the summer and fall.
Well, two things, a wealth of information through K-State Research and Extension channels. Check out what they've found in the trials in Sedgwick County and elsewhere. You can go to the Sedgwick County Extension website or the K-State Horticulture website. The second thing is take part in this webinar coming up this Wednesday. And again, how do folks do that, Matthew?
Yeah, they can go online and search for K-State Garden Hour, and that'll pull up our website where you can find all the past recordings and a link to register for this upcoming week's webinar.
And it's free.
Yes, it is.
Very good. Best of luck with it. Thanks for taking a few moments to preview that and to share some of the things that you'll be pointing out during that webinar. We'll talk again later, Matthew.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me today.
He is Matthew McKernan, Sedgwick County Extension Horticulture Agent. Closing out today's edition, and our thanks to you for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.